Welcome. Scott here. Here is a quick boss guide for the upcoming LUFENIA Plus event, Savage Wind Elvoret Raid. The featured units are Machina from Final Fantasy Type 0, Paine from Final Fantasy X, Shantotto from Final Fantasy XI and Wakka from Final Fantasy X. This raid event also marks the debut of Machina's BT and Paine's LD. Both Machina and Shantotto Burst will be realizable. We will be fighting 2 Elvoret which has 15 million HP each. The boss is immune to earth elemental damage. The turn requirement is 75. The HP requirements is 45,000. Before I continue further, here is a small disclaimer clause for the video. The guide is written based on the time that the event was released for the Japanese version. Please do note that it is possible that the boss fight mechanics might differ when the actual event is released in global. Firstly, let's go through the LUFENIA Plus Orb conditions. The LUFENIA Plus Orb will activate and deactivate twice throughout the entire fight. The first activation will start at the 79% HP threshold and deactivate at the 59% HP threshold. The second activation will start at the 49% HP threshold and deactivate at the 29% HP threshold. All LUFENIA Plus Orb activation will have a counter of 8. To uptick the orb, you need to have a unit to extend buffs. Extending any buff will uptick the orb by 6. As the buff extension skills are rare, it is important to save them and use them when you need to uptick the orb. There are 2 types of buff extensions. They are self-buff and party buff extensions. Firstly, let's cover on units that can extend their own buffs. There are a lot of units that have these capabilities. Here are 2 examples. Machina can extend his own buff with his Furious Blades Plus and Furious Blades Burst. Titus can extend his buffs with his AA and LD. I will be covering more examples in the subsequent slides. The other type is the party buff extenders. These units can extend buff by using a skill. They are Saz, Hope, Yuna and Echo. As the orbs will activate and deactivate in 2 short HP phases, it is possible to nuke past the orb, thus bypass the requirement of bring a buff extender for the fight. Next, I will be covering units that will be useful to handle the fight mechanics. Like other LUFENIA Plus events, it is always recommended to bring supports for their aura and buffs. They are Purim, Setzer, Agrias, Katsa, Ishtala, Bartz, Lena and Selfa. As the boss can gain tremendous amounts of Brave, and if you are playing the non-delay game, damage mitigation is a must. Options include Zac, Kor, Gladiolus, Warrior of Light, Orin, 8, Celis and Snow. For damage dealers, you can consider the following units: Machina, Titus, Terra, Cloud of Darkness, Lon and Ren, Shantotto, Chaos, Vayne, Kain, Shellcat, Queen, Aphma, and Tifa. In some of the runs, Bartz and Garland has shown to uptick the orb with their overhead buff. Their overhead allows their buff duration to be extended by 2. This might not work when the event comes to global. Regardless, they are still very useful for the fight. There are actually a lot more units that have buff extension utility. I didn't list down all as I can't fit them into the slide, so I have only listed down only those units which I think will be more easier to use to complete the fight. Other than Machina and Titus, I will be going through more examples. Terra can extend her buffs with her LD. Twins and Vayne can extend their buffs with their AA. Ada can extend her buffs with her HP+++. Shantotto can extend her buffs with her EX. Cloud of Darkness S2 can extend her S1 annulling power buff by 3 turns. Chaos S2 can extend his Body of Soul by 1 turn. Queen can extend her own buffs with her S1, EX and special EX commands. The boss will buff themselves a framed buff every 10 turns that you take. It will be highly recommended to bring a Dispeller to dispel it. One of the featured units, Paine, has Dispel utility with her LD. Units that have Dispel utility are bald here: Yuffie, Paine, Beatrix, Sid Raines, Cloud, Ferris, Kaduch, Lion and Vanille. As Baldir and Yuffie have buff stealing capabilities, they can steal buff for their own use. The boss hits pretty hard, so lots of JP do with the boss no turn setup. Cheese options with Idaroth or Sigma are also very popular strategies used for the fight. On the screen, you will see a timeline showing the HP thresholds triggers that you need to watch out for. Other than the standard LUFENIA plus aura boosts, you need to watch out for the boss Summarize Power phase triggers. The boss will use Summarize Power at the start of the fight. It will use it again subsequently when you reach a turn count that is a multiple of 10. The buff effect will get stronger as the boss gain more stacks. When you trigger the mechanic, the game doesn't deem the boss has taken a turn, so there is no downtick of orb when it triggers. After that, on the next turn, the boss will use Rising Slash, which ends a Storing Brave mechanic. The Storing Brave mechanic will see the boss withheld Brave equivalent to 100% of its max Brave. On its subsequent turn, it will use Storm Breath, which will absorb 50% of your current Brave before unleash its AoE Brave plus HP attack. Overall, this isn't a very hard fight as long as you have units to tackle it. Now let's proceed with the boss mechanics proper. Like the previous LUFENIA Plus fights, the boss will gain big stats boosts, Brave damage, and Brave gain reduction auras when you deplete their HP to a certain threshold. The thresholds trigger for this fight is at the start of the fight, 79% HP threshold and 49% HP thresholds. At the start of the fight, it will boost its defense stats by 200%. At 79% HP threshold, it will further boost its defense stats to 300%. The maximum Brave damage reduction auras is 90%. The maximum Brave gain reduction auras are 70%. To handle against the Brave reduction auras, you can use Brave damage up calls like Jack, Sephiroth, or bring a support that have Brave damage up like Lena. Alternatively, you can also use the Enchant and Imperil strategy to hit the enemies for elemental weakness damage. Machina, the featured BT unit, has a very strong BT realization. He will finish up the fight really fast if you have him fully geared. His S2 has been upgraded to provide him with 100% instant break utility. Paine, the other featured banner unit, has a strong debuff that lowers the boss Brave, thus making it easier to break the boss. Wakka and Shantotto has means of lowering the boss defenses, and Wakka can freeze the boss Brave with his status Reels debuff. Now, I will be covering the boss key mechanics in detail. The boss will activate Summarize Power at the start of the fight and subsequent turns that are multiple of 10. In other words, the boss will activate it at the 10th turn, 20th turn, 30th turn, 40th turn, 50th turn, and so on. On the screen, you can see a table detailing the effect of the buff. Every subsequent activation will increase the stacks. If you dispelled it on 20th turn when the stacks are 2, on the 30th turn when the boss activate the mechanic, the buff will be at 3 stacks. When the activation is triggered, the LUFENIA Plus orb won't downtick. To handle this mechanic, you can either dispel it or block the boss buff slots with 8 framed debuffs. I have listed down the list of dispellers on the screen. You can use them as calls. Baldir and Yuffie can steal this buff for their own use. You can actually have some fun with it if you intend to use them for the fight. Once the boss activated Summarize Power, it will use Rising Slash on the following turn. Rising Slash is a triple Brave attack and it will end with a Storing Brave mechanism. Make sure you have means to shave the Brave off or negate the Brave damage with Brave damage mitigation. If the boss has the Dark Tower buff active, the boss will most likely be able to break the target easily. Gravity, Ignore Defense or Instant Break might need to break the bosses after they gain those Brave. On the following turn the boss will use Storm Breath. Before it executes it, the boss will absorb 50% of your party current Brave before it unleashes its AoE Brave plus HP attack. As it absorbs the Brave, it might be better to minimize your party Brave so you can minimize the HP damage received. Make sure you have damage mitigation and healing so that you can heal back to full health. Taking these attacks back to back might end your run prematurely. Now I have reached the last slide of my boss guide presentation. The box on the left shows some tips on how to control the orb. Do pace your turns well and only use a buff extending skill when you need to uptick the orb. You can bring units that have buff extension utility, buff extenders like the 4 on the screen, or nuke the fight and thus ignoring the orb mechanic totally. After its initial cast at the start of the fight, both bosses will buff itself with the Dark Tower Wings buff every turn, that is multiple of 10. Although the buff doesn't grant tremendous defense stats boost, it does make the boss less susceptible to debuffs. When the stacks are at 5, it is almost guaranteed the boss will be immune to any new debuffs. There are 2 methods to handle this buff. The first option is blocking all 8 buff slots with framed debuffs. This is important if you are planning to do the Adaro cheese method. The second method is to dispel off the buff. For Sidmo runs, Reigns can dispel the buff with his EX, so stall his EX usage when turn count is approaching multiple of 10s. I have come to the end of my boss guide presentation. Hopefully you find it useful. If you like the video, please give a like. Please subscribe to my channel for future gaming content. Good luck for the fight tomorrow. Bye.